Everything should be fair. When every's a fair shot, restore fairness. Basic fairness for all Americans.
Boy, my president sure talks a lot about fairness. And the media and political class use the word fairness to justify everything from higher taxes to green energy subsidies. Without government, they say, things would be less fair. And so politicians can guarantee fairness. But Steve Moore of the Wall Street Journal says, no, they can't. What do you mean? No, they can't.
Government hasn't made things fair. In fact, I think a lot of the government policies, John, make the society less fair. And we really have to step back a minute, I think, and think about our society. I mean, is it fair that someone like Peyton Manning is going to sign a $20 million contract, whereas a nun maybe will never make that amount of money in her whole lifetime? Or is it fair that you have politicians that make 2 or 3 times the median income? Look, fairness, I think, have to be determined by the marketplace, not by politicians. And I think that's what the president is really talking about when he says fairness. He thinks that the people in Washington should decide what your after-tax income is, my after-tax income is, Tiger Woods'
right, but it's after tax. So
right.
He's not saying that Peyton Manning can't make a bunch of money.
Yeah, but he wants to take
saying
a whole lot of it away. And here's my problem. I mean, in our American society today, the richest 1%, Tiger Woods of the world, the Peyton Mannings of the world, the people like that, the Warren Buffetts, they pay 40% of the income tax.
God, they can afford it.
They can, but look, 40%. In fact, the top 1% pay now more than the bottom 95%. So we have a tax system that is highly dependent on the very top people at the top. One of the things that I think is unfair about our tax system, John, is that if you look at the bottom 50%, all Americans beneath the median, they're only paying 2.5% of the income tax. So think about that. That means all the people at the top,
cherry-picking income tax. They pay payroll tax,
but even,
sales
that's
tax.
True.
They're contributing.
That's true, but you know what? Even if you take all taxes combined, the bottom 50% pay a tiny share, less than 10%, whereas the top 50% are paying 90%. So it's a highly progressive tax system. The fundamental idea that Barack Obama is trying to sell the American people is the rich aren't paying enough. I'm saying to you, John, they pay an awful lot already.
Your opponents would say, but the rich are filthy rich. They're squandering money on mansions and stuff they don't need, and that bottom 50, 20, whatever percent you want to use, they need help. They don't have any money.
Sure, but you know what? Where do the jobs come from? When you talk about those people in the top 1, 2, or 3%, guess what most of those people do for a living, John? Actually, they're not football players, and they're not golfers and actors. Most of them, the vast majority of them, are small business owners. They're people who, in most cases, started with nothing, built up a business with their sweat equity and took risks in these businesses. I'm thinking about somebody like my father who built up his business his whole life. And you know what? He became rich. And he shouldn't be ashamed of that. And why should the government take as much as half of his money because of the... And he's a person who created jobs for those people you're talking about. Government doesn't create jobs for poor people. It's entrepreneurs and business owners who do.
And even the football player indirectly may
Sure, because they go out. I mean, there's an old saying that, I never got hired by a poor person, right? And there's a lot of truth to that.
Now, you wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal that raised other ways of thinking about fairness that I liked. Mm-hmm. Like, is it fair that the 3 counties with America's highest median family income just happen to be located in the Washington, D.C. area?
That's one of my favorites, John, because and that's been the case for about 25 years, as long as I've lived in Washington.
But it's increasing.
It is. The gap between Washington and the rest of America is increasing. And the reason it's increasing, John, is because government is getting bigger. Wait a minute. Government is supposed to be, reducing these income gaps, but actually all the money comes to Washington. Essentially, the way this works is we collect $4 trillion, we collect $4 trillion from the rest of the country, and then we keep 10% of it, and we send $3.6 trillion back. So we get rich off of this. I could never understand why people in Detroit or Sacramento or Portland, Maine would want to send all their money to Washington, let us have a carrying charge, and send it back to them. It's quite a racket, really.
It's working for you guys.
It sure is.
You also write, is it fair that Americans who build a family business, hire people, save money, and then when they die must pay a tax of 35%, going up to 55% next year, rather than passing that money on to their loved ones? I would say, yeah, they're ridiculously rich, and it hardly serves the children to get a gift of all this money. That makes them fat and lazy.
That's a good example, because let's say that you and I are in similar economic circumstances. Let's say we make the same amount of money over our years while we're working, and then we enter retirement. You go out and you gamble and you womanize and you drink and you spend all your money down to zero, right? You don't have to pay any inheritance tax because you basically spent it all, right? Frugally, I continue to invest in the business. I'm frugal. I save that money so I can pass it on to my children, so I'm leaving them a legacy. Why should I have to pay a 50% tax on what I saved, whereas you spent it all? I'm the one who acted virtuous, not you.
So I can see the disincentive to act virtuously.
Right. And the incentive of the tax system by having a 50% tax rate at death is to die. Was a best-selling book not long ago, Die Broke. You should die broke because that way the tax man can't take it from you.
Another brain expander you wrote, is it fair that Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, former Majority Leader Tom Daschle, Congressman Charlie Rangel, and other leading Democrats who preach tax fairness underpaid their own taxes?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy.
Funny, anyway.
It's funny, but there's a hypocrisy element to this. I mean, a lot of these Democrats self-righteously say everybody should pay more taxes, and you've got the Treasury Secretary, the head of the Ways and Means Committee, who wrote the tax laws and so on. These people aren't paying their fair share of tax, that they're not paying their tax liability. I think in some ways they were cheating on their taxes. How dare they say that I should pay more?
Well, all good new ways of thinking about fairness, and we're going to return to some of your ideas at the end of the show. But before you go, I just want to thank you for appearing on all these shows so I don't have to, where you explain markets to the left. I mean, you go on Bill Maher's show, CNN, Colbert, Michael Moore's movie.
Sometimes I wonder whether I'm achieving anything, but I do it just to be fair.
Well, we're all grateful that you do that. Thank you, Moore.
Thank you, John.
We touched on taxes this segment. When we return, more on that from the person who taught Steve Moore and me a lot about taxes and how they distort the economy in ways that lead to more of these, and also lead to affluent people like Mike Huckabee and me getting free golf carts.